She was standing in the rain, soaking wet, holding a cardboard sign that said one thing. Not "I'm hungry." Not "Please help." It said, "I don't want money. I just want someone to look at me." And out of every single person who walked past her that day, executives, tourists, couples holding hands under umbrellas, only one person stopped. He was worth $4.7 billion. And she was about to change his life in ways that no amount of money could ever buy. But before we get there, before we get to the moment that broke the internet, that made grown men cry in the comments, that made millions of people screenshot a single text message and send it to someone they loved, we need to go back. Way back. To a little girl sitting on a fire escape in Detroit, eating cold beans from a can, watching the city lights and whispering to herself that one day, things were going to be different. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a fantasy. This is the story of Emma Calloway, and how the most broken person in the room turned out to be the only whole one in it. Stay with me, because the twist at the end of this story, nobody saw it coming, not even her. Emma was 7 years old the first time she understood what the word eviction meant. She didn't learn it from a dictionary. She learned it from the sound of a padlock clicking shut on an apartment door, while her mother stood in the hallway holding a black garbage bag full of everything they owned in the world. Her mother, Linda Calloway, was not a bad woman. She was a tired one, a woman who had worked double shifts at a diner for 11 years, who smelled permanently of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner, who laughed loudly at bad jokes because laughing was the only thing that didn't cost anything. Linda had Emma at 19, alone. No support, no family, no safety net. Just a woman and a baby and the stubborn, terrifying belief that love was enough to hold a life together. For a long time, it almost was. Emma grew up in the in-between spaces of Detroit, not the beautiful parts you see in comeback documentaries, and not the worst parts either. She grew up in the gray middle, where the streetlights worked on some blocks and not others, where some kids had winter coats and some didn't, and where everyone just quietly accepted that some people mattered more than others without anyone ever saying it out loud. But Linda refused to let Emma accept that. Every single night, no matter how exhausted she was, Linda would sit on the edge of Emma's bed, and she would say the same thing. "Baby, your value is not determined by your zip code." Emma didn't fully understand it when she was 7, or 8, or 9. But she memorized it like a prayer. Because when you're poor, you need something to hold on to. And those 10 words were the most valuable thing Linda ever gave her. School was Emma's escape hatch. She was the kind of student that teachers quietly rooted for, the one who read every book twice, who stayed after class not because she was in trouble but because she genuinely wanted to know more, who wrote essays that made her English teacher, a tired woman named Ms. Patterson, stop and reread paragraphs out loud just to hear the words again. By the time Emma was 15, she had won 3 citywide writing competitions, been accepted into an accelerated academic program, and been quietly noticed by a scholarship committee at the University of Michigan. Life, for the first time, felt like it had a direction. And then Linda got sick. It wasn't dramatic. That's the thing about real tragedy, it rarely announces itself. It just arrives quietly, like a stranger at the door, and by the time you realize what it is, it's already inside. Linda started getting tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Then came the headaches, then the vision problems, then the appointment that changed everything. Stage 3 brain tumor. 3 words, 14 letters, and Emma's entire future collapsed like a building with no foundation. Linda's treatment was aggressive and expensive and only partially covered by the thin sliver of insurance she had through the diner. Emma watched her mother shrink, the woman who had laughed so loudly, who had danced in the kitchen to old Stevie Wonder songs, who had told Emma every night that her value was not her zip code. She watched that woman disappear inch by inch, replaced by someone smaller and quieter and so tired. Emma deferred her scholarship application, took a night job at a grocery store, took a second job cleaning offices on weekends, visited her mother every day, sat in plastic hospital chairs eating vending machine sandwiches, held Linda's hand and told her everything was going to be fine. She was 17 years old, doing the emotional labor of an adult, running on 4 hours of sleep and the sheer force of her own refusal to give up. And then, on a Tuesday morning in November, with rain hitting the hospital window and a vending machine humming somewhere in the hallway, Linda Calloway took her last breath. Emma sat there for a long time, holding a hand that was no longer warm, in a room that was suddenly the loneliest place on earth. She was 18 years old. She had $43 in her bank account. She had nowhere to go. The next 6 months were the kind that people don't talk about at dinner parties, the kind that happen to millions of people and get called statistics, but feel, from the inside, like being buried alive. Emma stayed in the apartment for 3 weeks after her mother died, ignoring the rent notices slipping under the door, too exhausted to process what came next. When the eviction finally happened, the second one in her life, except this time her mother wasn't there holding a garbage bag, she packed what she could carry and walked out into a Detroit February with no plan and no person waiting for her anywhere. She couch-surfed for a while, an old classmate's floor, a church shelter that smelled of bleach and sadness, a brief, disastrous arrangement with a distant cousin who turned out to be less interested in helping and more interested in controlling. She slept in a 24-hour laundromat twice. She knew which McDonald's let you sit for hours if you bought a coffee. She learned which shelters filled up first and which ones were safe and which ones weren't. She was not invisible. She was unseen. There's a difference. Invisible means you're not there. Unseen means you're right there in plain sight and everyone has decided to look through you instead of at you. Emma felt that difference in her bones. She still had her notebook. She carried it everywhere, in a waterproof bag her mother had bought her for her birthday years ago. And every night, no matter where she was sleeping, she wrote, not because she thought anyone would read it, but because it was the only thing left that was entirely hers. She wrote about her mother, about the apartment, about the fire escape and the cold beans and the city lights. She wrote about what hunger felt like at 3 in the morning. She wrote about the man in the expensive suit who had stepped over her bag on the sidewalk without breaking his phone conversation. She wrote about a stray dog who had sat with her under an awning during a rainstorm, both of them quietly waiting for the world to get a little kinder. The writing was beautiful, raw and honest and electric in the way that only real pain can produce, but she had no way of knowing that. She was just a girl trying to survive. 8 months after her mother died, Emma ended up in Chicago. She'd heard from another shelter resident that the city had more resources, more programs, more chances. She'd taken a Greyhound bus with money she'd saved by skipping meals for 2 weeks, arrived at Union Station with a backpack and a notebook, and the specific kind of hope that poor people develop, not big and bright, but small and stubborn, like a weed coming through concrete. Chicago was bigger than she expected, louder, more indifferent. She found a spot in a women's shelter on the north side, got a part-time job washing dishes at a cafe, started quietly rebuilding the scaffolding of a life. And one rainy Thursday afternoon, she made a cardboard sign. Not for money. She'd gotten past asking for money. The sign was something else, something she couldn't fully explain, an impulse. A cry that she needed to make in some form or it was going to eat her alive from the inside. She sat on the steps of a building on Michigan Avenue in the rain, holding it up. I don't want money, I just want someone to look at me. Hundreds of people walked by. Nobody stopped. Until one did. His name was Ryan Cole. And if you looked him up, if you had a pulse and access to the internet, you had at some point. The things you would find would be these. 34 years old, founder and CEO of Cole Technologies, net worth estimated at $4.7 billion, named on 3 consecutive Forbes lists, known for being brilliant and private and ruthlessly focused. What the Forbes profile did not mention, Ryan Cole had not smiled, genuinely, all the way to his eyes in over 2 years. His story from the outside was the American dream written in neon. Born in Columbus, Ohio, to a middle-class family, scholarship to MIT, built his first app at 22, sold it at 25, took the money and built something bigger, then bigger again, then so big that the number attached to his name stopped feeling like money and started feeling like an abstraction. He had everything, and he was one of the loneliest people alive. Not because he was unlikable. He was, by every account, decent and thoughtful and sharper than anyone in any room he walked into. But the money had built a glass wall between him and the rest of the world. People around him wanted things, deals, investments, access, proximity. He could feel it in every handshake, every dinner, every conversation. He'd been engaged 2 years ago. A woman named Ashley, beautiful, successful, completely wrong for him in the specific way that 2 people can be wrong for each other without either of them being a bad person. The engagement had ended quietly, the way things end when 2 people finally admit that the version of the future they were building together belonged to someone else's story. Since then, Ryan had thrown himself into work with the focus of a man trying to outrun something. 18-hour days, back-to-back cities, a schedule so full that silence, when it occasionally arrived, felt threatening. He was in Chicago for a board meeting he didn't need to attend but had attended anyway, because being in the office felt better than being in his apartment, where the quiet had a weight to it. He was walking back to his hotel, alone, because he'd dismissed his driver for the evening, because sometimes he needed to just walk among people, invisible in his own way. Not Ryan Cole the billionaire, but just a man on a sidewalk in a city that didn't care who he was. And then he saw the sign. He stopped. Not because of what it asked for, but because of what it didn't. In 20 years of wealth, nobody had ever asked Ryan Cole for something that money couldn't provide. And here was this girl, soaked through, rain in her hair, sitting straight back like she still had her dignity absolutely intact, holding a sign that said the one thing that money was entirely useless against. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked over. And he looked at her. Really looked. "Can I sit down?" he asked. Emma looked up at him. This man in a coat that probably cost more than her mother's last hospital bill. And she almost said no. Almost. Because she'd learned by now that people who looked like him didn't sit on wet steps without wanting something in return. But something in his face was different. He looked tired, she realized, not physically tired, soul tired, the kind of tired that Emma knew intimately. "It's a free country," she said. He sat down, in his $4,000 coat, on a wet step, in the rain. And he didn't say anything for a full minute. Neither did she. And in that silence, that impossible, inexplicable silence on a crowded street in Chicago, something shifted between 2 strangers who should have had nothing in common, and somehow had everything in common. "That sign," he finally said, "did it work?" Emma looked at him sideways. "You're here, aren't you?" He almost smiled, almost. "What's your name?" "Emma." "Ryan." She didn't recognize it. He noticed, and something in him relaxed, a tension he didn't even know he was carrying, the permanent, exhausting awareness of being known before you open your mouth. "Are you okay?" he asked. And Emma, who had been asked that question by shelter workers and social services and distant relatives and nobody who actually meant it, Emma looked at this stranger and did something she hadn't done in 8 months. She told the truth. "No," she said, "I'm really not." They sat on those steps for 2 hours. Ryan had nowhere to be. Emma had nowhere to be. The rain eventually stopped, as rain always does, and the city moved around them and they talked. Emma did not tell him everything. She wasn't naive, but she told him enough. About her mother, about Detroit, about the notebook, about what it felt like to be in a room full of people and be completely alone. Ryan listened in a way that people rarely listen, not waiting for his turn to talk, not constructing his response while she was mid-sentence, but actually, fully listening. And then he talked, and Emma listened the same way back. He told her about the glass wall, about the loneliness inside the penthouse, about how he'd stood at his floor-to-ceiling window 2 weeks ago, looking at the city 40 stories below, full of people living actual lives, and felt a kind of grief he couldn't name. "I have everything," he said, "and I have nothing that matters." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mom used to say that your value isn't determined by your zip code." Ryan looked at her. "She was talking about poor people," Emma continued. "But it works the other way too, doesn't it? Being rich doesn't make you worth more, and it doesn't make you worth less either." She paused. "We're both just people." He stared at her for a long time. "How old are you?" he asked. 18. And something in Ryan Cole's face broke open, in the best possible way. He didn't offer her money. Later, people would find this shocking, given who he was, but in the moment, it felt like the only natural thing. To offer money would have been to miss the entire point of the sign she was holding. Instead, he asked if she was hungry. She said yes. They walked 3 blocks to a diner, not a fancy restaurant, a diner, his choice, because the fancy restaurant felt wrong, and they ordered coffee and pancakes and they kept talking. At some point, Ryan asked about the notebook. Emma hesitated. Then she pulled it out of the waterproof bag and slid it across the table. Ryan read for 10 minutes while Emma watched him over her coffee cup, ready to grab it back if he laughed or made that face, that particular face that people make when they're being politely unimpressed. He didn't make that face. He read slowly. Then he went back to a page and read it again. Then he looked up and his eyes were different, alert in a way they hadn't been all evening. "Emma," he said carefully, "did you write all of this?" "Yes." "All of it? You didn't read it somewhere and—" "I wrote every word." He looked back at the notebook, then at her. "This is extraordinary," he said. "This is genuinely one of the most powerful things I've ever read." Emma didn't know what to do with that. She'd never had anyone say that to her before. Not like that. Not with that specific, serious, quiet certainty. She looked at her coffee. "My mom was my first reader," she said softly. "She was my only reader." The table was very quiet. "Well," Ryan said finally, "now you have 2. He didn't try to fix her that night. Didn't call his assistant and arrange a hotel and a new wardrobe and a life makeover. Didn't perform generosity the way rich people sometimes perform generosity loudly for their own benefit. He asked her before they left the diner what she actually needed, not what he assumed she needed, what she needed. She thought about it seriously. "A real chance," she said, "not charity, a chance." He nodded like he understood the difference, because he did. They exchanged numbers. She wasn't sure he'd call. He wasn't sure she'd answer. He called the next morning. What happened over the following 3 months was not a romance. Not yet, though the city around them seemed determined to make it one. Ryan connected Emma with a women's transitional housing program through his foundation, not his personal charity, a proper funded program with real support structures, because she'd said not charity, a chance, and he was paying attention. He also connected her, quietly, with a literary agent he trusted, a woman named Patricia Hayes who had been in the publishing industry for 30 years and who, when Ryan sent her 12 pages of Emma's writing with only the message, "Read this," called him back within 2 hours and said, Where has this person been hiding? Emma didn't know about the literary agent at first. Ryan sent the pages without asking her, which was, she would later tell him, the one time he overstepped. She was angry, genuinely angry, sat across from him in the same diner they'd started in and told him with complete composure that her voice belonged to her and nobody got to share it without her permission. Ryan sat with that, didn't defend himself, didn't explain. "You're right," he said, "I'm sorry." The sincerity of it disarmed her. "Okay," she said after a moment, "but what did she say?" He smiled, really smiled, all the way to his eyes, the first genuine smile in 2 years, and slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a book offer. Emma stared at it for a very long time. Then she started crying. Not gentle, cinematic crying. The real kind. The kind that comes from the deepest, most exhausted place in a person when something finally goes right after a very long time of everything going wrong. Ryan passed her napkins, didn't say anything, just stayed. He was good at staying. The friendship deepened the way real things deepen, not in grand gestures but in small, consistent, everyday moments. Emma, now settled in transitional housing and working with an editor on her manuscript, started meeting Ryan for coffee on Tuesday mornings. Not because it was planned. It just became the pattern. They talked about everything. About his company, her writing. About his childhood in Columbus and her childhood in Detroit, and the ways that America treated people differently depending entirely on factors nobody chose. About music. About grief. And both of them had grief, packaged differently but rooted in the same place, the loss of a version of a life that was supposed to go a certain way. Ryan introduced Emma to his world slowly, never pushing, always asking. She came to one company event, a foundation gala, wearing a blue dress she'd bought from a thrift store and altered herself, and she walked in like she owned the room, not because she was performing confidence, but because Emma Calloway had survived things that the people in that room couldn't imagine. And survival, real survival, gives you a kind of gravity that no amount of finishing school can manufacture. People noticed her, not because of who she was with, but because of who she was. Ryan noticed people noticing. He also noticed that Emma was the only person in the room who talked to the catering staff by name, who remembered that the security guard at the door had mentioned his daughter's soccer game and asked how it went, who laughed at things because they were actually funny, and not because someone important had laughed first. She was the most real person in a room full of performance. He was falling, he knew it. He was terrified of it. He was also, for the first time in 2 years, completely awake. Emma's book came out on a cold morning in March. It was called The Sign. It was about her mother, about Detroit, about fire escapes and cold beans and the ferocious, exhausting, beautiful love that poor people have for each other. It was about what it meant to be unseen in the richest country on earth. The reviews were the kind that make editors weep with relief. "Shattering and vital," said one. "The debut of someone who will matter for a long time," said another. It debuted at number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list. Emma found out while sitting in the diner. She'd ordered her usual coffee. She was reading the news on her phone, and suddenly there it was, and she put the phone down on the table and stared at the wall for a very long moment. Then she called Ryan. He picked up on the first ring. "I know," he said before she even spoke. "How do you know?" she asked. "I've been checking the list every hour since midnight." She laughed. That real, loud laugh that she'd inherited from her mother, that belonged to women who knew that laughter is free. "You're ridiculous," she said. "Congratulations, Emma," he said. And his voice, just those 2 words, was so full of something that Emma had to close her eyes for a moment. She didn't have a word for it yet. She was about to get one. It happened 6 weeks after the book came out. Ryan had planned something. He had actually planned something which was unprecedented, because Ryan Cole did not plan things like this. Ryan Cole acquired companies and restructured markets. He did not plan. He had planned a late evening in the same diner, on the same steps outside where they'd met. He'd even, absurdly, checked the weather forecast 3 times to make sure it wasn't raining. But Emma arrived at the diner early. And she was not alone. She was with a man Ryan had never seen before, and the way Emma was talking to him, leaning forward, animated, comfortable, made Ryan stop on the sidewalk outside the diner window and feel something cold move through his chest. He almost left. He stood there for a full 30 seconds seriously considering just turning around, going back to his apartment, dismantling whatever this feeling was through sheer force of discipline. He didn't leave. He went in. Emma looked up, and her face did something complicated. "Ryan," she said, "this is my friend James. We grew up in the same neighborhood in Detroit. I found him last week. I hadn't seen him in 6 years." James stood up, hand extended, ordinary, warm, clearly just someone's childhood friend. Ryan shook his hand, sat down, ordered coffee. And then, under the table, where no one could see, his hands were shaking slightly, because the 30 seconds on the sidewalk had clarified something he'd been refusing to name for months. He was completely, irreversibly in love with Emma Calloway. He told her 3 days later. Not in a grand gesture, not with flowers or a rooftop or a string quartet. They were walking along the lakefront early morning, both of them in jackets because Chicago in spring still has teeth, and Ryan just stopped walking and turned to her. "I need to tell you something," he said. Emma stopped, looked at him, and she knew in the way that you know before the words when you've been paying attention to someone, she knew what he was going to say. She didn't make it easier for him, she waited. "I'm in love with you," he said, "and I know that's complicated. And I know who I am and who the world sees when it looks at us. And I know you don't need me, you don't need anyone, you've proven that. But I needed you to know. Because not saying it is starting to feel dishonest, and I don't want to be dishonest with you." Emma looked at him for a long time. The lake was gray and enormous behind him. The city was waking up around them. Somewhere nearby, someone was walking a dog that was very enthusiastic about a pigeon. "Ryan," she said. "Yeah. I've been in love with you since the diner." He blinked. "Since the first diner, when you read my notebook and went back to reread the same page twice," she said. "Yes, that diner." He stared at her. "You've known for months," he said, "and you didn't." "I needed to make sure," she said simply. "I needed to make sure you saw me. Emma Calloway, not the story, not the homeless girl, not the project, me." He took a step toward her. "I see you," he said. "I have seen you since the second you looked up at me from those steps and made me feel like I was the one being assessed." She laughed. He laughed. And then they were not laughing anymore. And the lake was gray and the city was waking up and everything was different. Now, here is where you think you know where this story ends. Boy meets girl, girl gets the life she deserved. Billionaire finds his heart, love conquers all. Here's where the story surprises you. 3 weeks after the lakefront, Ryan received a call from his legal team. A call that turned him the color of paper and made him sit down slowly in his office chair and stare at the wall for a very long time. The call was about his company. Specifically, it was about a data breach, a massive, systemic failure in Cole Technologies' privacy infrastructure that had exposed the personal data of 11 million users, a breach that had been covered up internally by members of his executive team for 14 months. Without his knowledge, or so his lawyers said. The story broke 2 days later, and it broke the way only internet stories break, instantaneously everywhere with full volume, no nuance and infinite certainty. Ryan Cole became, overnight, a villain. The narrative was simple because simple narratives travel fastest. Billionaire tech CEO conceals massive privacy breach, leaves millions of users exposed while publicly championing data rights. Protests outside Kohl Technologies headquarters, advertisers pulling out, congressional hearing request, stock in freefall. And Emma, whose face was now publicly connected to Ryan's, they'd been photographed together at a foundation event. The photos had been everywhere. Emma, who had built her entire name on authenticity and truth. Emma, who had written a book about what it felt like to be failed by the powerful. Emma got the call from her publisher. "The association is becoming problematic," they said. "Our readers." "I know," Emma said. She sat in her apartment, her own apartment now, her own, the first thing that had ever been fully hers, and she looked out the window at Chicago and she thought about what to do. Everyone expected her to issue a statement, distance herself, protect her brand, her book, the career she'd just begun. Her publicist called, her agent called, 3 journalists called. She didn't issue a statement. She did something that nobody expected. She called Ryan. He answered after 2 rings. His voice was flat in a way she'd never heard before. "Emma," he said, "I need you to know that I didn't." "I know," she said. "You can't know, you weren't." "Ryan," her voice was steady, "I know you, that's enough." There was a long silence. "You should distance yourself," he said. "The association is going to." "Stop telling me what I should do," she said. And there was something in her voice that came from 18 years old on a wet step in the rain, from a girl who had survived things he would never fully understand, from a woman who was not interested in the approval of people who had never looked at her in the first place. "I decide what I do. I always have." Another silence. "Emma," he said, and his voice broke just slightly at the edges. "I'm coming over," she said. "Put the coffee on." She didn't distance herself. She wrote an op-ed. In the New York Times, which was running pieces about the scandal every day, Emma Calloway published an essay called "What It Means to Stand Next to Someone." She did not defend Ryan legally. She was careful about that, she wasn't his lawyer, and she said so clearly. She wrote about something different. She wrote about what it meant to be the girl on the steps, to be the person that the world decided was not worth looking at, to know, in your bones, what it felt like when someone decided to see you anyway. She wrote about accountability, about how the breach was real and the harm to those 11 million people was real, and that none of that was acceptable. She wrote that she hoped the truth would come out fully, and that anyone responsible would face real consequences. And then she wrote, "But I also know what it means to be tried by a headline. I know what it means when the story becomes simpler than the person. I was a headline once. Homeless girl." 2 words that made millions of people think they knew everything about me. They didn't. And I'm not willing to reduce anyone else to 2 words, including someone I love. The op-ed was shared 4 million times in 48 hours. It did not protect Ryan from the consequences he faced. He cooperated fully with investigators. Testimony confirmed that the cover-up had been orchestrated by 2 senior executives without his knowledge, and those executives faced legal action. But the op-ed did something else. It made the story human. It forced the internet briefly, imperfectly, in the way that brief, imperfect moments of collective humanity are still worth something, to slow down, to consider complexity, to ask themselves what they would want if they were the person in the headline. Ryan read it in his office with the kind of silence that replaces all other sounds. Then he sent Emma one text message. It said, "Your mom was right. Your value is not your zip code." She sent back, "I know, but she was talking to you this time." He stared at that text for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done in over 2 years. He laughed completely, fully, all the way to his eyes. Here is the twist that nobody saw coming. 6 months after the scandal, After the investigations, after the op-ed, after the world moved on to the next thing as the world always does, Ryan Cole stepped down from the CEO position at Cole Technologies. Not because he was forced to. Because Emma had asked him, one quiet Tuesday morning over coffee, what he would do if the company didn't exist, if the net worth didn't exist, if none of it existed. And he'd sat with the question for a long time. Then he said, I think I'd probably want to build something smaller. What kind of smaller? He was quiet. Something that actually helps people, he said finally. Not in the foundation, write-a-check way, actually helps, the way you helped me without even trying. Emma looked at him over her coffee cup. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, he said slowly, that there are a lot of kids in Detroit who are as smart as you were, smarter probably, and they don't have a notebook that survives the rain. They don't have a mom who tells them their value isn't their zip code. They have nothing. Emma was very still. And I'm thinking, Ryan continued, that if someone with enough resources actually paid attention to them, not charity, a real chance, he looked at her deliberately, I could build something that matters. Emma set down her coffee cup. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay, let's build it. He blinked just like that. Ryan, she reached across the table and took his hand. I've been waiting for you to say that for 6 months. The Cole Calloway Foundation launched on a Wednesday in October, in a former community center in Detroit that they had gutted and rebuilt and turned into something that felt like a place that believed in people. Not a charity, an investment firm, but instead of investing in companies, it invested in kids. Emma ran the programming. Ryan ran the funding and the operations. Together, they built a structure that by the end of its first year had served 240 young people in Detroit, Chicago, and Columbus, provided stable housing, academic mentorship, and in Emma's specific department, something she called Witness, a creative writing program where kids who had never been heard got to speak, and people with power had to sit down and listen. The first cohort of Witness had 11 kids. One of them was a 12-year-old girl from the east side of Detroit who wrote a poem about her grandmother's hands. Emma read it and had to leave the room for a minute. When she came back, she sat down next to the girl and said, "Your value is not your zip code." The girl looked at her. "My grandma says something like that," the girl said. "Yeah," Emma said, "mine did too." Emma and Ryan got married on a Saturday in May. Small wedding, diner where they met closed for the day, 18 people. Emma wore white. Ryan wore a tie that Emma had picked out and that he was mildly convinced was the wrong shade of blue, and she was absolutely convinced was perfect. The officiant asked Ryan if he had anything he wanted to say. He looked at Emma for a moment. "I walked past a sign," he said, "and the sign asked for the one thing I could actually give, and I stopped. I almost didn't, but I stopped." He shook his head slightly. "I almost didn't." Emma reached out and took his hand. "But you did," she said. And on the wall of the Cole Calloway Foundation office in Detroit, framed in simple wood, hangs a piece of cardboard. A little water damaged, slightly faded, and on it in Emma Calloway's handwriting, the words that started everything. "I don't want money, I just want someone to look at me." Below it, someone nobody will admit who, but everyone suspects Ryan has written in black marker 4 words. "We see you now." If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if you thought about someone you love, if it made you think about the people we walk past every single day, please hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below telling me what part of Emma's story stayed with you. Because stories like this only matter if they travel. And the only way they travel is because of you. We'll see you in the next one.